Hello, everybody. Is that it, Rocky?
Yeah.
Hey, I thought there was going to be something. I didn't expect applause there. I feel so fancy. Hey, everybody. Welcome
Hey,
to the
hello.
Weird Science Comic Boom Indie Comics Podcast. And here we are. We have 3 books this week. And I'm going to lean on you heavily on this. But before we end up going into it, hey, what's up, Rocky?
Oh man, it's
Uh,
good. About 2 hours before I'm doing these indie comic reviews with you, I was on a podcast with Nerdette's Newsstand and
mhm.
Joe Carano and a couple of other guys, Comic Breakdown, and one other individual I forget, on talking about masculinity in comic books.
Ah,
And
yes.
it was fun. It was actually a talk on masculinity, and it never got too toxic. It was
No.
actually kind of uh, yeah, it was kind of refreshing. It was
Yeah.
kind of good, but
Oh my. We have
yeah,
some masculine books and some not so tonight.
yeah.
Uh, I end up I like Nerdette and actually had my wife watch a bunch of her videos because she did a bunch of things with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. That is a big thing that my wife was interested in. So
Yeah.
shout out to her. I think that she's pretty cool. And I think you're pretty cool too, Rocky, there. And I'm sure that Patrick Zurcher's name came up because that was one of his sticking points in this week on the Twitters. But with all of that, we end up talking about some comic books here. And I think that there's going to be a play here. And I'm hoping that people don't get mad at me because of the idea. And it's one of those things when we do our reviews, we end up, we're not just doing things to gush on them, just sight unseen. And we don't end up actually picking a lot of these things ahead of time in the idea that, oh man, I read this and this is pretty cool. We pick some bigger books. We end up picking some randomly and even some with other reasons, which I'll explain in a little bit. What I'm getting at is me and Rocky have not talked before we put the play button on or the record. I have no idea if you liked any of these books in there. I
Yeah.
was not real happy with this week's books, but I'm hoping that you can end up convincing me and elevating my scores. One of the books that we're going to be talking about, I don't know that you can. I think it's a stinker, but you'll have to see what that is. It's not the first book, and I could give you a little hint, but you'll see as we go on. But how about you? Are you at least positive about these? You're going to end up, showing me how it is or whatnot, or
Well, I don't know. I think that I could definitely rank them from my favorite, to my least favorite, but I think they all have something to say. I can kind of guess maybe the one that you don't like, maybe the most, but I.
we'll
Uh,
see.
these are very different. We
Yeah,
got one
they are
which is
different.
kind of a twisted, perverted fairy tale, one that is a time travel twist, butterfly effect kind of comic book
Hmm.
story, and just a good old fashioned robot war
Yeah,
story. And
yeah,
so we got a very eclectic mix again this week, which I really like because it allows us to it broadens our horizons in terms of
it
the
does.
likelihood that we're going to dislike all of them. I think it makes it
Yeah,
more unlikely, but.
that'd be crazy. There's probably going to be at least one that we'll find, but in that you'll see there is. I had ulterior motives in one of my picks. One of the things I suggested, and it is. I'll tell you when we get to it, and I hope that people understand that it actually is something where I was trying to be, nice. I ended up and trying to kind of get on board with a writer that a lot of people have liked and I haven't, and thought that maybe doing indie stuff would be that ticket. Because a lot of times we do have, and we've seen it with this, the idea that we're enjoying the indie stuff. Sometimes you end up having a writer that when they're constrained in a continuity that isn't their own or characters that they didn't create, you kind of end up where you're not getting their full effect. And I was hoping that was the case. Unfortunately, I think it was an epic fail for me, but I think you might have liked it. But we're going to start with a writer and an artist that I would say that me and you both enjoy. It is Gary Frank and Geoff Johns. I know that people have issues with Geoff Johns, but we're here to do the comics and whatnot with it. So going into this, I didn't know because it is Junkyard Joe #1. I didn't know that it was, out of the pages of Geiger, which I haven't read the full deal. So I was a little worried. Oh man. And it was already, we were getting to the point where we had to, get things going. And I thought, oh crap. I even suggested to you, maybe we should just do the 2 books because I haven't read Geiger. And he said, no, it's not really that much of an issue. And I'm actually glad that I read it because this is one of those things. And I'm glad actually that I'm lazy and haven't read all of Geiger because I actually can be that point of view where I can tell people who may not have even read one issue of Geiger that they actually could have and read this. As like you said, it's funny. It's just a robot war story, but it does have a lot of feels in it. It ends up kind of hitting you without even, and it's one of those things that I'll actually probably reference throughout this episode. The idea that I go into this book, I don't know anything about the character, anything what's going on, but Geoff Johns and Gary Frank are able to make me get feels to the point that even in the back of this that you'll mention, I actually, got a little choked up by the end. And that doesn't happen much with me in stories that, especially that I don't really know the characters or have no investment in going in. So I was actually very impressed by it and actually very happy that you forced my hand into doing it because like I said, if it was up to me, I was going to say, let's kind of skip it. I'm glad we didn't. It is written, I said, by Geoff Johns and Gary Frank, colors by Brad Anderson, letters by Rob Lay. And I'll give it to you because with this, it's a Vietnam story. You start in 1972. And what I think that Geoff Johns does really well is you end up having the craziest of ideas. It's a robot that, and we find out why. And again, it's that sci-fi mixed with real history kind of deal that I do get a kick out of. But he doesn't sugarcoat what anything is going on, but doesn't go over the top with it either. It's just a platoon in Vietnam. And then later, I mean, just for a shout out, you even get Hawkeye Pierce, it looks like from MASH. But
Yeah,
in
it
this,
does.
you know what I mean? But in this, though, it ends up where it feels very realistic. And I say that knowing I'm talking about a robot war story because it makes it end up where you actually show that this robot is even more human than a lot of other comic characters and things going. And I thought it was a really, really cool play. How about you?
Yeah, I thought it was really good. One of the things I want to give a shout out to the various covers. My favorite cover for Junkyard Joe #1 actually has all the junkyard dogs.
Okay, yeah.
This is a Vietnam platoon there that has. It's just like Sergeant Rock of Easy Company. They
Hmm.
all have their fancy names, and this one is the Junkyard Dogs. And I love that this Junkyard Joe cover, one of the covers has all the men on the Junkyard Dogs, including Joe, of course, Junkyard Joe himself, who is of course the robot. And it's a surprisingly, as you said, it's a surprisingly heartfelt story. And it should be mentioned that there's also a black and white, a veterans issue of this that is also, I think, really well. I mean, it's black and white, but it's really good, and it has some extra additions on the back. That if you buy it,
Hmm.
$2 of every $2, it's the comic book. I believe it's a $4.99 comic, but so for $2 of it, when you buy the black and white veterans edition, goes toward veterans, which is wonderful. But it's a heartfelt story, and yet it's surprising because it's about a. I mean, good lord, it's about a robot, but it's in one issue you get a sense of the rapport between these men. It all the best war stories make you feel that you're part of that brotherhood of the
Hmm.
men that are giving their lives, and you get to know snapshots of their life as they're talking about their loved ones and wanting to get out of the war because who the hell wants to be in war? And this is basically their story, and they get this new recruit, which the sergeant calls an FNG, which I didn't know they called him FNG, which effing new
Yeah,
guy. Yeah.
effing new guy. I actually looked that up myself. It's funny. I actually went to look it up and I couldn't remember it was FNG. I looked up FNC first. I was getting a lot of banking
Yeah.
links, and I'm like, this can't be it. But yeah, the effing new guy, and that was pretty cool. And just the idea in this as you go, it's such a subtle deal as you go through, but you end up seeing that. This is 1972, I think is what it did say. And,
Yeah.
America itself, it was still a bit, divided, things like that going on. A lot of people, especially, didn't even want people in Vietnam, but ended up treating the vets like crap even when they came back, and all that stuff mixed in where you get these guys and they're very accepting to each other. They're a family in that platoon. And when you end up having this robot there, which they don't know at first, it's one of those things like almost like you're seeing a story where the robot learns to have a heart because of these guys, but then afterwards is the one to carry on. Even like you said, that cover's so neat because of the idea. This is a robot that seems unfeeling, and then with that, still ends up like considering them family, the name going with the Junkyard Joe and things like that. And it's a pretty crazy deal the way it is. But I agree with you. Like the idea that you get feels actually surprised me. And like this isn't one of those things where it's just a little oversized, but you don't end up like there isn't 17 fights here. There isn't like, eight, but what it does is you have a tension building because it is Vietnam. And also then when the fights happen and unfortunately there's some deaths, they actually hit. And I actually thought that it was well done like that because Jeff Johns deals with other things like dry socks, which is one of the most important things. If you ever hear of people in Vietnam and stuff, that's
Yeah.
one of the biggest things and mentions it, but doesn't feel like it's like, okay, that's on the checklist. Everything feels pretty natural the way everybody's going. And what I even like the idea because anytime that we talk about robots, especially on the DC podcast, whenever there's a robot, like say, even like the Metal Men or something like, I always wonder like, well, what are they paying them with in this? Like, what are they going to buy? Robot pants? That was my big joke here. They actually they have that joke here because it is true, but they take to this Junkyard Joe pretty well. I mean, the guy ends up, and I think also it's the idea of if the guy next to you saves your butt, pretty good guy then. And this is something that you have. But you go back to that because even that the setup of I want to get home. Hey, did I get a letter? You have the little, cartoony going thing that kind of plays out in the whole overall story in the Geiger as well. But yeah, you kind of start to feel for these guys, some of them that we lose. And you do feel like, you had more. It felt like a bigger thing than just this one issue. It felt like, oh man, like I'm invested in these characters in this one thing, and it actually shocked me, like I said.
Well, and the characters get sort of they die. The first one to die is the character Band-Aid, and this is why I recommend that people buy the cover that have
Hmm.
all the personnel, all the men on the cover, because right away you get to know them right on the cover, and
Hmm.
then as the story progresses, you slowly start to lose them, and as when Band-Aid is killed, this effing new guy who doesn't even have a name. You don't even know who he is. He's just FNG. He suddenly stepped up to the plate. He's an incredible shooter. He defeats the enemy, and he attacks one of the Viet Cong who unfortunately has a grenade, and so his human skin is blown off, and
Hmm.
he's revealed to be the robot he is. And they're in the middle of a jungle. They're in an absolutely crazy world environment. They can be killed at any time. And I mean, it's just kind of funny trying to imagine. Can you imagine in that setting? One of my favorite scenes is when this robot. I mean, saves their life, and they don't know how to react to him. Should they
Yeah.
kill him? Should they kill him? Should they
Yeah.
shoot him? And they're afraid to. It's like the Sarge says, "Are you kidding? The way that guy shoots?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
he's
it's like,
he's
"This is
helping us."
good." Yeah, it's true. It would be like all of a sudden we find out Tom Brady was a robot. You're like, "He's winning a Super Bowl, so I don't care." And what I like too in this, again, this isn't I mean, yes, he's a great shot, right? But it makes sense by the end. This isn't Terminator. This isn't Jeff Johns setting up like a revenge fantasy type deal of, "Oh, man, wouldn't it have been awesome if we had Terminator like robots in Vietnam? Man, we could have killed everybody. We could have won the war." It's not quite that. It isn't. It's there. He's there with them, and even when he shows up before it's revealed, that it's a robot where he has this fake skin or whatever, he's sitting there, and people keep trying to talk to him. They go, "Hey, what's up? Where are you from?" And he's just not talking, and kind of there's a sad play in that for me. Just the idea that they want to know about him and want to ask, but a guy who's in Vietnam there that's not said a word in a week, it's not that over the top crazy. They don't really end up starting to think like, "Oh man, this guy, whatever." There's probably a bunch of people like that, pretty much they've seen some things, whatnot. They don't know what he's been through or what. And so, yeah, it's kind of a sad deal. But they keep trying. They keep trying to get it. But then, like you said, he saves them. I mean, to the point of jumping on a grenade that would have killed anybody. But
and
luckily,
it's
it was a
and it's
robot.
and it's following when he saves them that he begins to the primary voice of the story is this Muddy Maury
Hmm.
Davis, who will go on to ultimately make a comic strip of his army unit that ultimately gets wiped out by the
Hmm.
end of this issue. And but through his eyes, I mean, he befriends this robot who
Hmm.
they start calling Joe, and there's a lot of really great moments, and you sort of alluded to one already about I mean, what finally breaks the ice is that they're playing poker,
Yeah.
and he plays poker with him, and the one guy matches is the best poker player until of course Joe plays, and
Yeah,
then
he plays.
he loses his cigarettes. He's all pissed off. What the hell does a robot need my cigarettes and
Yeah, yeah.
chocolate for? So I mean, there's some good moments of humor in the midst of this bad of this terror of this jungle, and I got to say that all of us have seen lots of war movies.
Yeah,
We've seen
yeah.
lots of Vietnam movies. And so you might ask, well, somebody who's listening to our review of this might say, well, why would we recommend this? Well, it's because, you know what? If it's done right and it's really good, why wouldn't you watch it, want it again? This
Yeah.
is actually, this possesses a surprising amount of verisimilitude when you consider the fact that we're talking about a robot.
Yeah.
And
And that's the thing, the way Geoff Johns plays it, you don't sit there at the end saying, "Oh, man, that was a crazy story with the robot and the deal." No, it actually does the job of making the robot a character, and just seems, and you feel bad. And you feel bad for him, almost in the idea where, again, I get this play of, there he is, a robot. He can't die, in that sense, but yet everybody around him was dying, and he did his best to try to help him. And, going out of that, I thought that like, there's a lot of layers in this, but at no point did I sit there and think, "Oh man, this is an awesome robot story," or "Man, this is like almost sci-fi." It's not. It's actually done in like a subtle way that, I mean, you could have just had this robot in the middle of Full Metal Jacket, and nobody would have batted an eye, and he was going around with Joker, and like,
yeah,
because he just becomes another one of the guys. They don't, and I think that Geoff Johns does in a good way. It's not like, "Hey there, transform into a Jeep," or "Hey man, I want your arm to be a rocket launcher." It's not like that.
yeah.
And again, it's playing with the idea. Obviously, a robot is well advanced of what would be 72, but this isn't a 2050 robot. This is a 1972 deal. It's actually, what we find out, it's doing calculations through this, almost like a street level, jungle level idea of surveying what the war is all about. And that's the big twist as we get to the end. And I thought, even that should be like, you know, crazy. And but it wasn't. I'm like, okay, it's one of those things where, yeah, you're sending a robot into Vietnam to determine if this is a winnable war. And unfortunately, the robot, almost like an undercover cop, almost in my mind, he's gone in too deep. He actually had a little bit of feelings for some of these guys who ended up treating him just like another,
And
soldier and brother. I mean,
that's
it
right.
really was crazy.
And what works is that not it's quite obvious that this robot has feelings for his fellow brothers who are
Yeah,
ultimately killed. But
yeah,
it's the scene. It's a 3-page sequence uh that where
yeah.
all of the men are essentially wiped out and killed, and it really tugs at the
It
heartstrings.
does.
And watching all of them, and Matches, Big Jack, Joe, Sarge, Green, they're all slowly wiped out, and the sole survivor, Muddy, only survives because Joe saves him,
Yeah,
and Joe feels helpless. And here I am talking about a robot who's really
I know.
hasn't displayed a lot of emotion up until that time.
No,
And
it
then,
doesn't even have a mouth. I mean,
yeah,
it doesn't talk. It listens. And the funny play is, with it listening, first off, that's what a lot of these guys need, just somebody to talk to. But it's that weird deal where Geoff Johns comes up with a brilliant idea of, there's that robot who, and you could tell him anything. He's a robot. So you're opening up, and we're there to listen. You get a peek at these guys. And I think that the progression of this is done in such a way where you get the heartstrings, because you get a series of pages where it's these individual guys, and you go, and Geoff Johns does this really well all the time. You go in halfway through a conversation, but like one of the guys is talking, he's like, "She's 6 and she's got this laugh. I just want to get back and hear that laugh."
yeah,
So he's talking about a daughter. Then the next guy, he's just laughing because he looks over, and in camouflage deal, Joe has made, all these twigs and stuff. And he's like, "Man, you look like a house plant, Joe." And just laughing. They're having a great old time in this. He's helping people. And then you see these same people in almost the same type of panel progression just die one after the other. And it's sad. I mean, that guy that we just heard, like, I just want to hear my daughter's laugh again. You have a daughter. How heartbreaking is that to even put yourself in the shoes of that and then even think some of the guys who came back didn't really all come back either. So it really gets to you. And then you go with what's supposed to be an uncaring, unloving robot who's going to determine if all this is worth it and seems to have a little humanity in it. And we find out that really the end shows the hero. He kind of stops the Vietnam War on the US side of it, right? Because
Yeah.
that's what the deal is. But you go from there. I'm telling you, I'll gush about this because later, I'm gonna have to bite my tongue. Maybe I think I don't know. I guess I don't have to. But
Well,
anything else?
Well, what's really good is he in it's almost as if Joe the robot gets angry and he goes to wipe out the Viet Cong, and then
Yeah.
of course he comes across a young child and a mother protecting her child, and it's like he just viscerally rebels against the concept of war, and he literally shuts himself down. And this is what really pulled me in the ending. I mean, the emotions leading up to that were really good, but I mean, I'm a student of history, and
Hmm.
I know a little bit about the Vietnam War, like everyone else. I've always hated Henry Kissinger. I've always thought he was a war criminal. I still do. I hope when he dies, he goes to hell. And he was, of course, helping out Nixon with the
Hmm.
Vietnam War. And here it ends with Nixon actually, because they refer to him as Unit Beta, because he shut himself down. The U.S. authority, Nixon and Kissinger, seem to conclude that that means we can't win the war because this robot shut himself down. And I find that so fascinating because Nixon and I mean, frankly, Nixon and Kissinger, I would have thought, if they had a weapon like Joe,
Hmm.
they would have just replaced them. They wouldn't have. I'm surprised that they relied on what this robot said to actually conclude that
Hmm.
the war is not a good idea to pull out. I just find that really odd. So there's something about Joe. I'm really curious as to know what his origin is. What's so special about Joe that a president and his advisors
Yeah.
would follow him like that? So that's what kind of fascinates me on this whole thing. And so when it can actually have an impact on what Henry Kissinger of all people are doing and Nixon, I thought that was just really
Yeah.
fascinating. And I
Yeah.
like Jeff
I
Johns
agree.
uh, doing that aspect of it. But I don't know. What do
Yeah.
you think of the end?
I'm telling you, the big play, he goes and he's mad. I mean, this is a robot without even knowing and seeing. I mean, there's no facial change. It's a robot with no mouth, just these eyes, and he ends up freaking out. And he ends up going. It reminded me a bit if you're a Star Wars fan. This is Anakin going after the Sand People after his mom dies, and he ends up in that. Remember, he says to Amidala, "I killed everyone, the kids, everything." Joe goes in, he legitimately kills that kid. I mean, he shoots him in the head and then sees the mom come out, sees the kid, and then that's it. He's like, this is what war did to me. He's an uncaring robot that ended up being then, a killing machine because of his anger. His robot anger got him. And so he ends up just blowing himself up. In the meantime, I do believe that the one person who was living, the woman, the mother who came out to grab, she has to be dead. It looks like a nuclear explosion came when he shut down. I mean, and even that ripping the gun apart, doing all that, and then just kind of like laying down and giving up. That's crazy. And then when you end up having that deal where Nixon, yeah, it's unwinnable. We got to pull out. We'll have to, see what's going on with that. But then we get, Hawkeye over there with their. I didn't see Radar. I was looking for him, but you even have that where the one guy who does end up living, Muddy is the guy who ends up doing the comic strip and stuff like that. So that's a pretty cool deal. Even then, though, he's trying to convince, and it's one of those things that's going to probably eat at him, the idea that he knows there was a robot. But when he tells this to the doctors, like, you're going to be looked at as crazy. And, I think that you went a little. Jeff Johns kind of stresses this. Oh man, they're going to think you're crazy. You don't want a Section 8. No, no, no. There was a robot. I don't want to give you a blue wristband. Hey, there was a robot. And then finally he realizes, yeah, I got to shut up about this. He just wants to get home. And even he's all messed up, but they say, we'll get you to walk eventually. But at the end, you just kind of go and he falls asleep. And, then In a heartbreaking deal, I guess. I mean, there's the weird play at the end because he's been sending letters to who he says is gonna be his future wife, his fiancée. When I get back, we're doing that, but it looks like all those letters came back, and I don't know exactly what that means. They were denied, return to sender. I found another guy. Maybe I don't know. We'll have to see, but that's even
But
kinda, like, heartbreaking to me, like, "Oh,
yeah,
man, like, what
it
happened?"
it makes you wonder, and we know from one of the we never had the solicits to read, but I do
Yeah,
know that in the solicits, which always give a little bit more away than they
yeah,
probably should, we know that this Muddy character goes on to create a cartoon strip
yeah, the
called
cartoon strip.
Junkyard Joe, much like Beetle Bailey, and all of his friends who died in the war in that horrific scene, they're characters, and he becomes a famous cartoonist. And the story, as the story proceeds, apparently, it's Junkyard Joe is going to be coming out of the woodwork because the question remains: this was in 1972. What
Mhm.
happened to Junkyard Joe in the
Yeah,
modern day? Where is he? What happened to him? So that's sort of a central question moving forward. And I should mention too that this Junkyard Joe comic strip was in the Geiger 80-page special. It was just
okay.
one page. It was a nice little teaser.
Kind of a cool
Uh,
deal.
yeah, so it's kind of nice here, and I have it up on the screen for those watching YouTube on
Mhm.
YouTube. But
That's pretty
yeah,
cool.
yeah. So I mean, kudos. It's quite. We would be remiss if we didn't mention the fantastic art by
It's
Gary
great.
Frank, Brad Anderson on the colors. Fantastic. I mean, we wouldn't be experiencing or feeling the emotions we are reading this if not for their artistic
Yeah,
endeavors.
yeah,
And it really they do a pretty good job here. So what would you
yeah.
give it?
I'd give it a 9.5,
Uh,
9.5 for me. I loved it. I thought it was really good. It surprised me
yeah,
in the fact that even I said I was gonna tell you, "Let's just skip it. It's getting later." And so, that's always, like, not the greatest of ways to go into something. You're almost already agitated, whatnot, and the minute I started reading, I'm like, "No, this is really good." And Jeff Johns, whatever, like I said, you can have your opinions, you can even, make your stands, whatnot, but I still think in the comic side of things, he's one of the best comic writers out there,
yeah.
and this shows it again, and when he teams up with Gary Frank, it ends up even elevating that. It ends up being something real special. What would you give it?
I I'm gonna copy you 9.5.
Yeah.
I loved it, and because it's building a universe that I'm really interested in, and plus it has the feeling that this could be a just a 12-issue story that has a great message, but it
Yeah.
could also has potential to be something that could endure and tell many stories because it's a robot, so robots are
It is a
immortal,
robot.
but
Yeah.
you never know.
Robots
So
can keep going. Also, I just want to point out that in my mind, and again, I didn't read all of Geiger, so, whatever might have happened there, whatever. But in this going forward, you end up having Muddy doing this comic strip. That's cool. Oh my God, he's doing this comic strip seemingly like maybe a tribute to his buddies who ended up dying and this robot that saved him, whatnot. But you're starting to get places there that people start coming to visit you and say, "This has to end." Like, there are people out there that will know exactly what he is writing and that this is top secret stuff that can never get out, stuff like that, that I think could be even intriguing, where you could end up having almost like conspiracy theories that people start having around the comic and all this. Like, yeah, everybody's loving it surface level, but what if it was real? And I saw this and I did this. And like you said, what is he doing now? And what happens? So that's kind of the excitement I have, that I think that there's a lot of, potential of going forward in even weird ways of how this goes. And I mean, you go forward, what happens when they want to find Junkyard Joe again because they need him to go to, Iraq or, Afghanistan, and he doesn't want to go. I mean, he probably is done. He ended up shutting down and whatnot. So we'll have to see how that is. I think that there's a lot of potential in it. And if you're listening and you're like, "Yeah, I don't like war comics," I don't really either. Or if you're like, "Yeah, the Vietnam, I'm not a history buff." I kind of might be a little, but not, on the Vietnam War and stuff. You don't have to be that to read this. It's just a really good story. That's one of the. It almost reminds me of like a really good documentary where they say, like, you could have a documentary on stamp collecting, which I've never done, but if it's a good documentary, they will get you anyway. That's their job, to get you into something that you may not be that interested in. What's the hook? This has a hook. I mean, it's huge, the hook with this robot that seemingly, kind of got feelings, but it's not in the way you'd think, not in like a sci-fi way. Every time I say something, I just want to keep talking about it more. But we'll move on to the next book. We have other two books, and now I gotta, kind of figure things out. Here is Briar number one. That's what we're doing next, right? Briar number one, written by Christopher Cantwell and art by Herman Garcia. It is a Boom Studios book that came out this week. It's $5, 4.99 here in the U.S. Again, I think I'm gonna read this solicit. I already went through it. It's not gonna give us that much, but I think that this is one of those that maybe it needs kind of an intro, a synopsis of what it's about. And it says, what if Sleeping Beauty never got her happily ever after and instead had to save herself? Set in a brutal fantasy world that time forgot, this isn't the fairy tale you know. Eisner Award nominated writer, producer, and director Christopher Cantwell, Iron Man, The United States of Captain America, Halt and Catch Fire, and rising artist Herman Garrick, or they end up spelling it wrong, Herman Garcia, from Kazar, Lord of the Savage Lands, reimagined the classic tale of the epic dark fantasy adventure. So you end up having this a Briar Rose type story here, and it is one of those, hey, we're going to take a fairy tale fantasy deal, and we're going to retell it. We're going to end up, mixing and matching some things going on. The thing is, I guess we can just say whatever we want here, right? That's why we did this pod. I hate Christopher Cantwell. I think he is one of the worst writers that I've read anything on. I can't stand him. I hate everything that he's done that I've read at Marvel, including the Doctor Doom book that they don't mention, which I believe was the one that was nominated when they say Eisner nominated. I did not like the United States of Captain America. I think his Iron Man is god awful, terrible, and one of the worst books I've ever read. If you aren't on that train, you might like this more. If you don't get mad at me, this is just me. I don't like the guy's writing. I think I'll use the term that you asked me about. I think he's a hack, Rocky. But that's why I picked this, though, and that's why I said at the beginning. Maybe in my mind, I thought that it was because he's not good at superhero stuff, even though he's doing that. You know what I mean? There are some people, even like a Mariko Tamaki that we talk about at DC. I think that she's better suited on slice of life teenage drama stuff where she's really good at that and not so great at some of the superhero stuff. But I just wanted to see if that was the case. I actually wanted to like this so I could say to myself, okay, the guy is good. I see what people like about him. I just don't get it with the superhero stuff. I hated this. I hated every page turn. I couldn't stand it. It was so long to get through this slog of a read that I was angry by the end. And that's why I ended up where I had to say to you, this book almost cost me actually reading Junkyard Joe because it took so long to get through. I didn't even see any reason to keep going. I thought that the writing was over the top, just ridiculous. The transitions were horrible. I did like the art, so but in that, I'm interested. And again, if you like it, that's fine. It just didn't hit me at all. I thought that it got overly complicated for what is a retelling of a fantasy. You don't have to get that crazy to do a dark retelling and maybe ease us into this. I thought that, I didn't like it. But what did you think?
Well, first of all, I'm a huge fan of fables, and I've been reviewing. I'm rejoicing with Bill Willingham being back, and I'm reviewing fables every week with DC there, or they're formerly known as Vertigo, or whatever. And I even liked the first few seasons of Once Upon a Time. So I like fairy tales. And look, there's a reason why these fairy tales endure, because these are timeless stories.
Timeless classic stories.
Right,
I agree.
any twist on them can usually, if done right, can be very potentially interesting. Now, on the surface here, I got to say this got my attention because the idea that Sleeping Beauty doesn't wake up is interesting, and she sleeps for an extra 100 years. She wakes up and the world's basically a shithole, and basically her kingdom is completely destroyed. Everything, it's basically like waking. It's like going to sleep and waking up in a dystopian heartland, and it's like, what the hell happened? And I will say this, that what Christopher Cantwell has done here is he's on the one hand, he's captivated my interest with the story, but there's some questions I have that I don't get a very satisfactory answer to. I find it very, very hard to believe that in the way he tells this story that this princess, this is Briar Rose.
Hmm.
Those I'm not a I'm not big on Disney princesses, but this is Princess Aurora for longtime Disney fans,
Hmm.
otherwise known as Briar Rose. She basically uh, think of the movie Maleficent with
Angelina Jolie.
Angelina Jolie,
Yep.
where she basically pricks her thing on a spinning wheel and she falls asleep. And Maleficent basically hates Sleeping Beauty and does this to curse her. And one of the fairy godmothers, Merryweather, tries to protect Princess
Hmm.
Aurora by, instead of having the curse kill her, it just makes her fall asleep,
It makes her
and
fall asleep.
you will be resurrected when you are kissed by your one true love. Now, what I find really odd here, and this is where Chris Cantwell, I think he's going off in a direction that it's a little bit iffy. Is the prince arrives, and apparently Princess Aurora's king and queen. It doesn't seem to bother them that this new prince doesn't even bother kissing and waking up their daughter.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
he doesn't want to wake her up because, well, I mean, basically the queen's going to be nagging me. I don't want a woman nagging
Yeah.
me. I want to govern the kingdom. I mean, I find that just ridiculous. But then, on one hand, it has the potential, maybe if written right, to be like like a Game of Thrones type of political intrigue. Why wouldn't you want to wake up a queen? Was there some sort of give me a political reason? Give me some sort of
Yeah, he
interesting
just
reason
doesn't
why.
want a nagging woman, and,
Yeah, yeah.
here's the thing, that's what gets me, and this is kind of the thing that bothers me with a lot of things that Christopher Cantwell does, the kinda, let's push away the reality of this, and really, I like how you explained it, and what made me laugh is when she wakes up, I'm like, "Man, she woke up right in the Life After People," if you remember that
Yeah.
series, the way it is, everything's overdone, but you don't even really get an idea of, like, what happened, hopefully, we'll find out more of that, but in that, he wants to play the fairy tale, obviously, but you have to have your spin on it. You have to have your twists and turns. And so he ends up making it by starting out in with a fairy tale that's, oh man, these fairy tales, everything is great. There's always a happy ending. And I understand that he wants to make that dark, but even right away, she's there and he has to mention the idea of, yeah, and then we had problems. So my father, the king, he went out and killed people that weren't even involved because that's what kings do. But then even when he comes back, like right there was like, okay, I get a fairy tale over. I mean, this is starting to get a little, not sus, but not really my cup of tea. And in that with it, then you have this prince come, and then you do have a little of the Game of Thrones deal of on the king's side of, okay, we'll get this prince. That means his family's in our fold. You have all this in the history of kings and queens and whatnot.
Yep.
But when the prince says, like, yeah, I don't think I want to kiss your daughter. She's a real nagger. You know what I'm talking about? She yippity yapping. And the king and queen are like, whatever. That sounds great to
Yeah.
us. And I'm like, really? Like that's what you're ending up in my mind. You're trying to wed your daughter off to increase your deal. You would kind of want her in the mix there for you if you're doing a Game of Thrones type of deal, which is kind of maybe the deal. But yeah, this doesn't really work well
Yeah.
when you're like, oh, well, we're going to combine the families, but my daughter doesn't have anything to say, and we're going to keep her. It just doesn't work out in the
Yeah.
reality of that deal
And
for
he
me.
obviously doesn't love her. Like, obviously he's not
No,
in love with her. He doesn't want to wake her up.
no,
He's
it's just
just
a political move.
yeah,
I
it's a
mean,
political move to him, and so it makes me wonder. Well, if then is Cantwell dispensed with the true love aspect of the fairy tale?
oh yeah,
Maybe
I
he
think that
has,
he's
and but
completely gone.
I mean
Or
that's I
yeah,
don't
it's
know.
weird. I thought that what we were going to get was, later on, somebody like she would finally find it that this wasn't her true love anyway. Even if you went with this idea, I mean, in this beginning, before we end up going to Life After People, because then all hell breaks loose, there are some neat ideas. And these things like this, it reminds me a little of even Birthright, Joshua Williamson, these sort of things going on. You have all these, and even like Wicked, these retellings. But I thought it would have been interesting where you end up having this prince show up and he knows that he is a dud. He knows that he can't. So he doesn't want to ruin all of it by saying, like, he kisses her and she doesn't wake up. What does that mean then? What goes on? That might have been a little interesting, but it's not an interesting angle to me, except for the fact that she kind of does get left behind and you have that time span and whatnot. But even then, you go from a fairy tale, and I think that again, you explained at the beginning, fairy tales, timeless tales. They stood the test of time. These things have been. That's why Christopher Campbell's using it. It's a great story. It really is. I think by the end of this first issue, I realized that I think that his version and the changes just make a shitty story, and I want to get back. I want to read
Well,
the original one.
he-
I think you have to make
yeah.
something as interesting or clever by the end, and I don't think he does that at all. I think that he's just doing his nonsense, and it just for the sake of it, almost it seems. It just doesn't feel as well laid out and interesting.
Well,
Like it's
here.
not something that I was like, oh my god, that's a crazy twist. Yeah, it didn't really work for me,
Well,
but you go.
there's so many questions I still have that I'm definitely going to give this a few more issues before I pass
Okay.
judgment on it, because first of all, one of the things that has to be pointed out here is somebody kissed her and revived her 100 years
Mm.
later. Who the hell was that?
Yeah, I
And
know,
how did this
and
person have the ability to revive her with a kiss? Who was this?
mm,
Is this a man? Is this a woman? Is this a fairy tale? Who
yeah,
revived Sleeping Beauty 100 years later? That I'm curious about. The other thing I'm curious about is where have her three godmothers went?
I know,
And
and
I believe they're Flora, Fauna, and Merryweather are the name of her three fairy godmothers, and Merryweather was the one that sort of lessened the curse. And so, what happened to them? And
well,
in fact, there's even a scene near the end where she ends up meeting up with this other person who she ends up being held
yeah.
prisoner with this
I'm
Norak.
telling you,
She's
I
an Ice Blood
yeah,
character
but
from
this
a
is where he
Norse.
completely lost me. I lost so much interest. And even then, though, when you said it, I think there's a funny play here that you could have done as well, because when she ends up being kissed and revived, but then whoever did that seems to have, run away, got away, whatnot. And I thought you could have even done a reverse deal where that person leaves, like their shoe falls off, almost like a Cinderella deal. There, you're reversing the play there and going and having that kind of fun little deal where, oh my God, he's not just doing Briar Rose. We might actually be getting all of these tied in some sort of fate-like way. He doesn't really do that. But when we end up going, and there's the thing, when he ends up going off into these other characters, when you end up Briar Rose is just bloodied up and just walks into this village, and it's so long, everybody's forgotten. I think that what we're going to get is the fairy tale, the fairy godmothers. And in this, he doesn't say just, oh, my godmothers, and I could tell you, oh my God, I think this is more of a realistic play of it. No, it says fairy godmothers. So we'll see. I think maybe we're going to get a play like we did in the Starhenge, almost, of the idea of a world that has forgotten or lost its magic. And maybe she's going to have to end up doing something like the fairy godmothers themselves, or off wherever it would be. But it doesn't seem like as much of a magic based deal at this moment now. You end up having some wacky stuff going on, but
Well,
that whole deal, and
I'm,
maybe that might be something that's
I,
interesting.
I
I'm
want to
not sure.
I want to make a comment about, because you said one of the things that really frustrated you was the language used in their narration, and maybe you thought
Yeah,
it sounded a
yeah.
little pretentious. But uh, Christopher Cantwell, I mean, makes it very clear. The narrator at the beginning of this story makes it very clear that the narrator ends up being boiled alive and dead. This
Yeah,
is
yeah,
not
yeah.
going to be a happy ending, and the
Uh-uh.
language used here is just. I mean, I'm going to share some of it. It's just hilarious. Destiny, fate, valor, ho ho, the flies and maggots pretend at the majesty of the dung heap. The way they describe Sleeping Beauty, the way she describes herself, ignorant babe, brat,
Mhm,
idiot. She thinks she's an idiot. She thinks that she's naive. She wakes up. She doesn't know how to use a sword. She doesn't know how to use
mhm.
anything. She is naive. She's the Disney princess waking up 100 years later in a dystopian future and doesn't know what the hell's going on. And this is Christopher Cantwell goes out of his way through very flowery language, which is going to be hit and miss with some people. Clearly, it's a miss with you. And
Mm.
I think that's where he could have maybe played it a little bit more straightforward, but he's making it very clear here that this is a fairy tale gone catastrophically wrong. This is not a story this is not a comic book that you want to give to your daughter and read
No,
to her before she goes to sleep at night by
no.
any stretch. And what I find, but I do like some of the things he's doing. I like the question, who resurrected her? Whose
Mm.
kiss awoke Sleeping Beauty? In particular, even at the end, uh, you know, where is this headed? Like, what exactly this future? What is Sleeping Beauty? What's her destiny now? What is
Well,
she
yeah.
going to be doing? And this is one of the potential downsides to it is I don't know if like, you know, it seems to be setting up a lot of things. She has a dream. She doesn't even want to go to sleep. She's afraid to go to sleep. She
Yeah.
has a dream
Well
of somebody calling her a sleepwalker, saying, "I will find thee." And so, something must have went catastrophically wrong here.
well, again, I think that the play with him, and I'll give you what I think Hack Christopher Cantwell will do, but in that, she just ended up waking up after 100 years. She's afraid if she goes to sleep again, she's never waking up again. It would be somebody that, she has PTSD against sleeping,
Yeah.
obviously, and I thought that was kinda clever. I actually thought that was, and again, there's some things in this that I kind of think it's just, and again, maybe I'm tainted by some of the things that I've read by him that I end up, and here's the thing, you may like Christopher Cantwell way more than me because what he reminds me of is Tom King light at Marvel. He ends up having his own style. He ends up doing things. I think the Iron Man book, if you kind of look at it, you can squint a little, and it really does, in my mind, resemble the Batman run of Tom King. The idea that Tony Stark is in the background, Hellcat is pretty much, and it's Hellcat.
Yeah.
You have, Tony and Cat instead of Batcat, but you end up where she kind of, runs everything going on, all that. There was a non-wedding. I mean, it really did play off a lot like it, but in my mind, a lot of things that I've read from him in that, and even the Doctor Doom that people like, but it ends up where he sets up some things and then he ends up resolving them in a way that's either just forced through narration or just not as clever as you think he is. I'm telling you, I'm not saying that this is how it's going to happen, but it could be as base as you find out that there is Sir Jonathan Love. And that was just it. Love's true kiss. That's where you get it. That he would do something like that may get a chuckle, but that it could be or we may never find out. It may end up being nothing. It's just there's bits here that I thought were interesting. The problem is though, and it's one of those, by the end, would I rather just read the fairy tale bit, or has he intrigued me enough to want to find out what went wrong and how to do it? And I'm more of, I thought, the beginning. By the end, I really don't care. It starts going and drifting off into La La Land with everything going. And it almost feels like the idea, hey, what happened if you had this Briar Rose? She ends up, like you said, not even just post-apocalyptic deal or whatever. Something bad went down, and now she's in, say, Conan the Barbarian
Yeah.
time land. It
Yeah.
feels very like realistic, but realistic in a barbarian type way. And I didn't get, like, she's there and she gets captured by a slaver with this other, ice, whatever, this woman named
Yeah.
Spider.
Yeah.
And in that,
Yeah.
I thought that it was like a slog. You're not having your main characters do that much. They're there in a cage. They're being, driven here and there. And I kind of want my characters to do something. Yeah, it'll end up
It sort
being
of reminded
more,
me a
but
little bit like Mad Max. Like she became
yeah.
Mad Max in this dystopian desert and what have you. And
Mhm.
I was actually kind of glad that Christopher Cantwell put a map on the end, because
Yeah.
it gave me some sense of the geography. Because as I read it, I read it twice to get a handle on it,
Yeah.
and I don't think it's
It's
bad.
okay.
I should say that I read. I'm not big fans of Cantwell's Iron Man. I stopped reading it when
Yeah.
3 or 4 issues in, and I wasn't a fan of his Captain America, but not necessarily for the reasons that are
Yeah,
sort of
yeah, yeah.
common. But quite frankly, I wasn't a fan of Tom King's Batman, and
Mhm. But you
unlike
like some
you,
of the stuff now.
I love some of what Tom King's
Yeah,
done
yeah.
outside his Batman, and so I think this is the best thing that I've read from Chris Cantwell so
Okay.
far. It's only the first issue
I
now,
know.
but the
I
only
can't
thing
get
that
that upset. It's
w
the
well
first issue. It just at
well,
the end, I'm just angry.
here's what concerns me though is I wish I hope I don't know if this is a 5 issue or 6 issue. I
Mm.
hope this has a finite. I hope this isn't like a story
Okay,
arc.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Do you know
know
what I
what you're
mean? I
saying,
want
yeah.
this to have a definitive ending
So that
where
he has a beginning, middle, and end already in
yeah,
mind, that he can't,
exactly,
dilly-dally.
because I'm a little concerned that there's too many I have too many questions here on this opening issue that
Yeah.
I hope are kind of addressed, and there's plenty of room here for him to impress the shit out of me. Lots
Oh,
of room.
yeah.
But right now the jury's still out. I'm a little bit tainted from what I've read from him in the past, but I'm gonna give him the benefit of the doubt. I'm gonna give this. I'll go first. I'm gonna give this a 6.5.
Okay, here's the thing. I'm yelling about it. It angered me. And really, what angered me was the idea that it was kind of my idea to do it. I'm glad that you liked it more than me, but I actually thought this would crack the code with me. And then finally, I can say because you end up having some writers that I don't like that everybody loves, and vice versa, whatnot. But usually, people who I don't love, like a Tom King, he ended up doing a short story way back about a guy who came back. I think he was in a war. It was about segregation and things like that. I wish I could remember what it was, but it was one of the best short stories, comic wise, I've ever read in my life. It's unbelievable. It's so great. I end up, and I'll even send it to you. It's free online, even, and it was one of these things. I think he might have been nominated for an Eisner, but I didn't think he. It's one of the best things that I've ever written. So that, and we talked. I love when he did Grayson when
Yeah.
in the deal, but then so at least when I don't like the stuff, and I really don't like a lot of Tom King stuff, but there's stuff that I did like. So at least there's something there for me when somebody says, "Oh, I love Tom King." Well, I like Grayson. Hey, I like this short story that I can't remember what it's called. And that's what I kind of want with Christopher Cantwell, because in that Christopher Cantwell, he doesn't have a ton of fans, it seems, because his books don't really sell. But the fans that he has, they're pretty high on. I mean, it's one of those where his Iron Man, the reviews, if it's under a 9.4, there's only 3 people that end up reviewing it, but they seem to love it. I want to be able to say, okay, I get it. I read that Briar, and I think that that was good. So I think he does have it in him. But then I read this and everything, and I think, like you said, not just the questions, but me sitting there thinking, okay, well, why do we have that scene? And why aren't we learning? Like some interesting things to me would be she comes to. I want to know, and we could get this. This is one issue. But does the world remember her? I mean, it's 100 years later, or has she become kind of a fairy tale to people? Is she known? Is what happened to the kingdom? Obviously, that's a big thing. But what happened to her line? What happened to the deal? How does this world work? What's going on? And he ends up like going in big, but then it kind of narrows down. And a lot of the issue is them in a cage with a slaver. But even to get there, it always felt like there was some info or scene missing. And it just didn't feel complete by the end. By the end of me reading this, and I have problems, I have attention span problems out the wazoo. It felt like a bunch of scattered scenes that were kind of pushed together to get it going. And you get the big idea of a fairy tale gone wrong. But I didn't get
Yeah.
the individual nuggets. Like we just did the Geoff Johns deal with a robot in Vietnam. And at the end, I felt like, boy, that is a full story. And just that one thing got me invested.
Yeah.
This, I'm more invested like you in that weird roundabout thing of, well, I want to see if this makes sense. That's not the greatest way to be invested. I want to see if he can actually pull
I,
something out that
I
I'm
would have.
interested in. But I'm there.
Yeah, I would have
But
liked to have seen. I agree with you with the scattershot nature of it. I would have liked to have seen a few more of the characters from the original
yeah,
Sleeping Beauty, like even maybe hints of Maleficent. Which maybe, I mean, for all we know, maybe Maleficent is the one that kissed her and revived her. I don't know.
yeah,
But some a little bit more hints of that, or the fairy godmother or something. And maybe it's there, and I'm not seeing it. I'm not an expert on Disney fairy tales,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
but in any event, I I'm guessing that Christopher Cantwell knows more about Sleeping Beauty than you
No,
or
I would
I do,
hope.
so
Yeah, I hope.
I'm prepared to give him a little bit of rope. I just hope he doesn't hang
And
himself
that's
with
yeah,
it.
and that's the deal. I'm with you, and that's one of the things that I love, where you go in, and if you end up next issue, we'll do it, okay? Because I'm giving it a 5.5. I'm not that low as you. I'm lower than you, but not as so. In that, what I'm looking for is where all of a sudden something happens. Maybe in this issue, maybe we're not aware, or next issue something happens, and I say, "Oh man, that's really weird. Like the huntsman wasn't this, or we get this." And then we find out, oh my God, that actually was the original Germanic version. Like I need something clever to like really get me of the idea of like, holy crap, he did it. Like he actually twisted and turned it in a way that I thought was off, but it's
Uh,
completely on and going this direction. That might also hint at some other things, guys. But
yeah.
I don't know. I
I
don't see it.
I
It's
I
tough.
wanna We should also mention the art by,
Yeah.
German Garcia. One of the things about Sleeping Beauty here is that There's only on one page at the beginning where it shows her in the past, where you
Yeah.
can imagine she's beautiful, but throughout most of this, she's still a fairly ugly looking creature. Her skin is still
Oh yeah,
dry.
she's
She's
just
still, even when she
old.
wakes up, her body's not recovering particularly
Mm-mm.
fast. I
Mm.
mean, she's not. So it's funny because the art here is not the type of artist. Garcia's art is such that he's not your Disney princess artist, so to
No,
speak,
yeah.
that you'd imagine drawing a Disney artist by, or Disney princess by any stretch. But I think it works here. So I will say that artistically, this definitely pulls me into a world that
I
feels
think the
very
art's good.
different than this feels very different than a traditional princess tale. And that's both a good thing and maybe a little bit of a bad
Yeah.
thing. I'm going to leave the jury out on that, because I think a little bit more of some flat, a little bit more of a some if I had maybe some extra artistic or visual you know,
Yeah.
Easter eggs
Hmm.
of traditional
Well,
traditional Disney art, maybe that would have maybe pulled me in a little bit different, because I know that Mark Buckingham does that in Fables,
yeah,
where
yeah.
there's always visual cues there that if you know a little bit about the fairy tale, you'll see
Mhm.
it on the page,
How
and
about this?
you know,
I'm gonna see if I can crack the code. Because at the beginning, you actually get almost like it looks like a dream sequence of back in the day. It's not. It's what it was. Everything's bright.
mhm.
It is a Disney looking. And then when she does wake up with all the things gone, maybe this is just me guessing and saying to you, maybe with that idea, maybe fairy tales have gone away. Maybe this awful world that she's woken up to has lost its concept of magic. And maybe as we get it back, it'll start getting more and more of a bright color palette. And maybe even that's why she isn't recovering as much. You can say it's because she slept for that long and
Yeah.
whatnot, but maybe the magic that she needs to recover isn't there. And that's why you're pushing. I mean, if you really want to show a world that is without any sort of hint of magic, show slave traders grabbing people and selling them. That's the worst of the worst, and maybe that's the play. I don't know.
Did
I
you
have no
notice the
idea.
Captain Hook character? Did you
Yeah,
notice that
yeah,
looked
yeah.
like
There's
Captain
some
Hook?
fun stuff
Yeah.
in it,
So maybe
right?
that's an Easter egg for all we know.
Yeah.
Maybe these are formal for characters that are related to other characters that have
Hmm.
lost some magic or what have you. Who knows? But kudos
Yeah.
to colorist Matias Lopez,
Yeah. It's good.
because I mean, I think that was, I don't know if Matias is, if that's a man or a woman, but
Hmm.
whoever it is, I think they were there's a lot of colors here, uh, conveying a lot of different types of moods and different
Hmm.
types of settings, and it worked for me. It worked for
It
me.
it just didn't work yet for me. Now I'm talking. I'm starting to think some things because even with that, where she goes to sleep and this nightmare that she sees ends up not necessarily being just somebody going to kill her or whatnot. Even if you look at it, it's like, "Hear me, sleepwalker, do not hide. I will find thee." And in that, he started that again. This is wacky stuff that I'm just, but in that, like, could that possibly be because it's looks like an Indian girl, maybe? I mean, you can kinda but that might be one of, say, the Lost Boys, something on when you said Captain Hook, that kinda goes with some of the characters that were hanging out with Peter Pan as well, but I don't know. I don't know if that makes anything or you're gonna deal with that. Are we dealing with a full world of fables and, fairy
Yeah.
tales, or is this just specific? Because that's kind of interesting as well, having maybe like a Peter Pan-esque kid who I'd never grow old, and here I am, but I'm stuck in this awful world, and we need to wake up magic. I don't know. We're making up this stuff in our head that interests me, so maybe I have to give a little credit, or is it just I'm trying to fill in blanks? But we'll have to wait to see what happens. I hope that it is something that is fun and a little better, trying to get back. Because right now, what is like at the end of this issue? I think that's another thing, and what are you getting at? What is your big play? What are you trying to have your hero do? Because here she is in an awful world. At the moment, she just wants to survive through a desert and not be a slave. But I need a bigger thing. And the idea of maybe bringing back fairy tales or bringing back magic, because most of the people that she knows, if they aren't fairy
Yeah.
godmothers or whatnot, are probably dead. I mean, it's 100
Yeah.
years later. So what is her MO? What is the mission statement
And that's
here?
exactly what I meant when I said
Yeah.
that at the end, like you said, at the end, they're sort of wandering off. But like you said,
Yeah.
where are they going? And my
Yeah. What are they
criticism is,
doing?
and then they showed a map, which I was glad to see the map. But then the map makes me believe, Well, if he's showing me a map, that means they must be on a long journey. And if they're on a
Mhm.
long journey, is this story ever going to end? Like, what's the
Yeah.
point? And the fact that we never really got much of a hint in this first issue is a little bit dismaying. It makes me
Yeah.
wonder. I hope we'll get some sense as to what is the hero's journey that Princess Aurora is going on here. Briar Rose. What is her hero's journey? I'd like some
Mhm.
sense of what is that journey going to be, because we
Mhm.
haven't really got a
Yeah.
sense of that yet.
Yeah, I'm with you. But I'm 5'5", you're 6'5", so you're a little more positive than me, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll come around. I'm telling you, at the beginning, it was another one of those things where I don't know. I just wanted to have something straightforward and have the idea of like, oh, this is good. Like, let's get our feet, set and then get your fancy nonsense. But we'll move on to the last book of the night, and it's Earthdivers #1, written by Stephen Graham Jones with art by David Gianfelice. It is from IDW Publishing, and it comes out actually like the Junkyard Joe coming out this week, this Wednesday. So if anybody went and like, oh man, I got to get the Junkyard Joe, you're gonna have to wait till Wednesday when it does actually release into the stores. Just as a shout out, this is one of those things here, and I'll tell you again, I'm not a huge time travel story fan because it starts to wreck my brain and it starts to make me think of paradoxes. Then I think that you have to play around with those. Oh my God, let's figure this out. We're getting like kind of things with that at DC right now with the Flashpoint Beyond, but a lot of times things just get thrown around and I'm not really sure. Though with this, I think that the concept of this is really, really cool. I think that the idea that you have, again, a world gone bad and an America gone bad where these people who out of nowhere, I didn't really think that this was a time travel story until it happened, but they're even seemingly using like old Indian, Native American cave that has time travel, but they're going back in time to stop Christopher Columbus. Basically, is the concept. If we can stop Christopher Columbus from going and discovering America, well, you can get, you can roll your eyes at points and say, well, he really didn't, whatnot. But that's the play of this and being a historical deal and going. And I think that that's a really neat concept, though. It immediately makes me sad how it's set up and how it's kind of like a no-win situation for some of the people involved. But with it also, when you go back in time and you spend a lot of time seeing if our main character at that point can tie knots and kind of convince people that he's not a stowaway, even though he is, and by the end they know he is, it kind of lost me a bit. I wanted it to be more like, again, it's almost one of those things where you have it being written as an important thing that Stephen Graham Jones is doing here as the story goes. And I think maybe that's keeping him from doing a little, fun and swashbuckling stuff or whatnot, or comic booky stuff. But I thought the pacing at points was off. He is not necessarily a comic book writer. He writes books and things like that. And that's something that happens a lot when people kind of cross over into that. You have less page space. You have to be visual with it, but you can't have a big play being if you can tie knots or not. I just, again, it seems kind of silly to say it, but it really felt like there was a lot of effort being involved of trying to convince Columbus's crew that he should be there as, a rigger when he wasn't. And they really, in my mind, would have just thrown him overboard. This is a guy who's going to end up taking up a lot of food and space here for nothing because he can't do anything. And then you kind of mix in the idea, oh my God, he's a magician because he can see the future, which it just kind of happened. I think the art's great. I love the art.
Oh, it's
And
fantastic.
again,
There's that best page is that when they showed Santa Prince, the Pinta and the Santa
yeah, the
Maria
Pinto, the
on the
Santa Maria,
dock.
yeah.
It looks
Yep.
beautiful. It
It
looks
looks
gorgeous.
great.
Yeah.
And I like the characters. Now, I'll say I like Tad, who we have our main character. I'm still confused, and I think again that's one of the plays here in comics than TV, movies, or whatnot, and even novels where you can really play up descriptions and stuff, and you kind of get. I think that some of the characters are kind of left behind. I don't really get too invested in them. Like I said, I like this Tad, but the other characters that are in our time, or at least the present in this book, I thought they were kinda, left behind. I wanted to know more about them, to be more invested, and, again, I think that the idea where I like alt history stuff and whatnot, but you're playing with paradoxes. I think it's interesting, the Christopher Columbus angle. I've never seen that, but again, I like the alt histories, but I haven't really dove deep into them and know all the deals. I mean, most of it is, hey, what happened if the Nazis won the World War II? That's usually, or hey, what happened if the South won the Civil War? These are the two big ones, but there are all these others. But I did like the concept. I just thought it was a little clunky in the way it was played out. How about you?
Well, I looked at this. It's funny how this interested me in a slightly different kind of way than how you looked at it,
Okay.
and that is, I looked at it. I thought it. I'm a history. I've got a number of
Yeah.
degrees in my life. One of the more useless ones was my history degree, which I never did anything with. But I'm glad I don't regret it. But I'm a student of
Yeah.
history, and I like it. And being Canadian, I know a little bit about Aboriginal history, and I actually really appreciate the fact that this is an interesting approach by having have Native Americans
Mhm.
deciding that what destroyed humanity was the existence of the United States of America. That's quite an
Mhm.
extraordinary claim, and what I find really interesting is that the Earth is all but destroyed. It's 100 years. The Aztecs got it wrong, or the Mayans got it wrong. It wasn't 2012. It was 2112. The year
Mhm.
2112.
I
With
thought that
that,
that was
yeah,
funny.
right.
Like, and again, I wish that the play in my mind, it wouldn't have been the Mayans that were wrong. It would have been us trying to
Yeah,
figure out their calendars, and we ended up not putting a decimal point somewhere or
yeah.
something, like we messed up. But I thought that was great.
But
I thought that was a really cool way to start it.
and what was also good here, which is essential for a time travel tale, is that you have to establish the rules of time travel.
Mhm.
Remember Avengers Endgame, right? You got to,
Yeah.
it's, and in this case, it's probably not like Back to the Future here on this for either. But
Mhm.
and I like that the rules here were interesting enough. It's Tad's wife, Tad and
Yeah.
Sosh. They both know what they have to do, and it involves basically killing Christopher Columbus because they need to prevent the formation the United States of America from
Mhm.
coming into existence. Now, right away in my mind, that creates all kinds of images of the butterfly effect. There
Yeah.
are literally countless ways. I mean, an infinite number of ways that it's just like clip the wings on a butterfly and a hurricane will start in
Oh yeah.
Barbados or
Yep.
something. And so that sort of idea that how would you? There's an infinite number of ways that you could probably prevent the formation of the United States of America, going back to the 13 colony, preventing the American, et cetera, et cetera. But they figure they want to kill Christopher Columbus. Okay, that's fine. And how they do it is very interesting. And the way that the writer Stephen Gray, Graham Jones sort of approaches it is that it's this cave. This cave is it's rather interesting. There you can go back in time on this cave. You got to go back naked when you go
Mhm.
back in time through in a certain portion of this cave. It's a one-way trip. You can never come back unless you just only go back a week or two.
Yeah.
But you can only bring one item with you, and that one item is so important because it's that one item that the cave will read to tell you where to go. So you have to have
Yep.
an item that will take you back to the specific time period that you want to get. So we're not even sure exactly what he takes back to get to 1492 on the coast, to get on the Santa Maria where Christopher Columbus is. But it's interesting for so long as all four of them, because it's Tad, his wife Sosh, and then two other people, this Emily and
Mhm.
this yellow character is his name. They as long as they stay in the cave, they don't know if, because the minute that Tad leaves, they don't know if he's changed history.
Mhm.
But they have to leave the cave and look at a history book to see if history's changed, or just look around them, and nothing seems to have changed. And what I really find fascinating here is, and maybe I'm just reading into this. In fact, I know I'm reading into this because it's just my own wish fulfillment. But if you're a Native American, and let's face it, colonialists, Americans, Canadians, all of us, we never treated the Indians very well.
Mm.
You know, we
Oh,
pretty
I
much
know.
wiped,
Yeah.
and so now I'm thinking, imagine the power that this Tad has. He can go back, kill Christopher Columbus, and when he gets to America, he can
Yeah.
bring technology and bring his knowledge to the Native Americans. And instead of having United States of America, I, I, maybe you're
Yeah.
going to have a very powerful native population. Who knows? So I'm thinking, because what I love about this is that this ends with a warning where basically one of the characters, Yellow, says to
Sash.
Tad's wife, basically tells her, you know, don't look for your husband in the history books. You do not want to see what he has
Yeah, so I
become.
mean,
So
again, you might find out and you might be 100% right, and he might take it too far. He might actually start killing off other people. He might end up, being just this crazy who in a way, he's going to change the timeline. And the people in the timeline aren't going to know that originally the Native Americans and natives, they ended up being treated poorly, but that's going to be his vengeance. So it'll make him look really bad. I mean, the idea that he might be justified, but is he in a timeline that's changed? He would be looked at as just, a terror. And I think that you play that play. I was worried at the idea where the classic is you kill baby Hitler and then you get super Hitler. You always end up where, well, it could be somebody worse. And in that, he might be his own worst deal. It might be. But in it, just to point out, because when we're talking about this, you might tend to start thinking that this is one of those where it's going to get preachy, that it ends up, and I'm just saying this first issue. It doesn't.
it
This is
doesn't.
played out as a straight up time travel change history deal because in this, it's not just a bunch of Native American guys and gals hanging out in a bar going, what would be cool? We should go back and kill that Christopher Columbus because he's an asshole. No, the world has gone really, really wrong. In that, you have a subtle deal at the beginning that threw me. It's like, all right, there's spaceships. I mean, they have spaceships leaving to go colonize other planets. And a bunch of people are left behind here. And what they want to do is let's go and change. And I thought that I said earlier, the idea that it made me sad, and it does make me sad when they're like, yeah, he can't come back. And the play is if he ends up going back a day or a week before, you'll just end up catching up to where they are now. Like
Yeah.
he'll just end up like, oh, here I am. Hey, I had that week or whatever.
And he's going to
You're
use a
not gonna-
bottle to communicate. Like he's going to send
Yeah.
something.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
And so, but you can't come back if you go back, to the 15th century. You're going to die. You're going to die of old age. This is not like he's a cyborg or anything like that. So I thought that was a pretty cool deal, but it was sad. I mean, it does end up being sad that they, these two people who love each other, but it's important how I'm going to go. And I do like when Sash says to Tad as he's about to leave, well, how will I know if you succeeded? And he says, well, you'll get a better world. There you go.
Yeah.
And I thought the cool play, I thought it was really clever to start out in pretty much a place that's barren anyway. You're in the Midwest. You end up having. So that's not changed really anyway. Like a lot of places in middle America like this, even stuff that has been preserved a bit, it still is like it was at points. So when they come out, hey, it looks the same. Well, that's because you're in this remote area. They have to leave and go and get a book and whatnot to try to figure out. And I thought the cool play is it going to be a subtle difference? Are we going to find out whatever the deal? And it ends up looking like something went real wrong with Tad. But like I said,
he ends up having Tad. Actually, it looks like Tad actually lets a kid die. He sacrifices
he has
a kid.
To. He ends up,
he blames a kid because he tells a kid that the boat, the Santa Maria, is going to run into a floating mast, and so because he knows what's going to happen because of the history books, because one of the other members, Yellow, told him what's going to happen, and he blames it on this kid. He tells the other shipmates that this kid, he overheard this kid talking to a goat.
Yeah. And I love the plays like, yeah, I'm going to say something like that. These morons who believe this stuff before, I know how to play them. But I did like that even before you go on. I did like that idea where you have Tad here and he's got to do some things that he would normally not do. He has to get on this boat. He kills a man. Even says like, I never did it and really feels bad about it. Now he gets to a point where he's got to, because again, he needs to survive. The one thing that I will step aside and say, though, because Columbus does come on the boat to hear about what this is, this witchcraft of knowing what was going to go on. In my mind, I think that maybe Christopher Columbus, though a God-fearing man, might actually think that's kind of interesting. Like, this might help out. And then you might have even been able to get a weird play where Tad, and you still may, does Tad necessarily have to kill Columbus, or can he, if he ends up becoming the advisor, can he kind of swing him over somewhere else? Can he go, hey, let's go over here? But in that, you're playing full out witchcraft, don't know, and he lets a kid die. He ended up trying to befriend him and actually wants to prove that he's from another yeah, and he screwed up. He should have never have said anything about anything like that, but he lets this kid get thrown overboard and die. 2 people have died now, and then he starts thinking to himself, he's justifying it in his mind already of the mission's more important, the mass of people versus the few, all that, and he's starting to go down a dark path that he wouldn't. But if you have to kill Christopher Columbus and you know you can't get back, the minute that Christopher Columbus shows up on that boat, I am running, spearing his ass right into the water and taking him down with me because you're never gonna. That's all you need to do. You have one mission. That's it and done. And I was like, even this is, stab him. I don't know, but he doesn't know how to do the. I like to where you end up. He has to get and do this, but they didn't know really the full plan. Usually, you'll have these plays where, okay, we're going to go back to ancient Egypt. We're going to have an Egyptologist, and we're going to get that guy, and he's that. This is just Tad. And he's there. He doesn't know how to do all these knots. He even knows he's only there because he speaks languages. And he messes up at one point because he ends up getting scared and ends up reverting to English at one point and stuff. So it's cool. It's just the idea, like I said, there's some kind of things that kind of go a little too far, but you go with it again. I'm
Well,
going too much.
there's just so many questions because this can go in so many different directions. As you said, this Tad character, he knows multiple languages. He's got skills, yet
Mhm,
he doesn't know how to tie a knot, and he doesn't do a good job learning how to learning the nautical knots.
mhm.
Because he doesn't really pass himself off as a sailor very well on Christopher Columbus's ship. But nonetheless, he's there and he knows he's got a job to do, and he ends up even sacrificing the life of basically a young teenage
Mhm.
kid in order to get it done. And so clearly he's willing to do what it takes to get the job done. And if he's willing to do that, why is he waiting? You got to
Yeah,
wonder why doesn't like you said, he could have just dived and killed
just do
Christopher
it.
Columbus at any time.
You're
And
never going to come back from it. You might as well suicide mission. Just do it, right?
yeah, and but then maybe we don't know. Like, I'm sure he's got an escape plan because I'm
Yeah,
thinking to myself, okay, so he kills Christopher Columbus, then what? So
yeah,
then
yeah.
he must is he does he have a plan for his wife to meet up with his wife in 1452 somewhere because she'll travel back? Like, I mean, is there some sort of plan that they have? We don't
Yeah, I
know
don't
all
know.
this. He's going to plan. He still hasn't. He's got to do something with the bottle to send a message back in the future or to the future. So he's
Mhm.
got to do that. I'm not There's so many different ways that this can go, and plus there's just human nature. Like I said, maybe he'll
Yeah, you
change his
don't.
mind. Maybe he'll
Yeah.
decide to become the tyrant. I mean, if he's in the past and he has knowledge of the future, he can change it, and he could probably become a king in his own right. uh
Yeah,
I mean, think
yeah.
of the knowledge that he could bring the Native Americans if he goes there in advance and tells them the future and tells them about Columbus and tells them what and he's got even a basic knowledge of
Oh,
astronomy
yeah.
and
Oh, I'm telling
eclipses.
you.
And I mean, this could go in all kinds of directions, and so I find it fascinating. One thing I want to point out, though, that might be a little bit of a clue is the title of this comic book itself. We haven't talked about the title yet. Earthdivers.
Yeah,
There
yeah.
is a reference in the comic as to what an earth diver is. Apparently, it's a reference to an old, I guess I'm assuming, a Native American story
Mhm,
where
yeah.
the world was drowned in water, and there's three earth divers that dive deep into the ocean and bring dirt up into the surface to start the world over again. And
Yeah, and
so
you
it's about three earth divers. And now I note that there's four main characters here that we start off with.
yeah.
I'm not sure how that story relates quite to this time travel epic, but it's interesting because I do know that a lot of Native Americans have a lot of stories that they don't share. They don't believe in. They
Mhm.
pass it down from generation to generation. They don't generally publish or share their stories with just the common populace. They just share it between generation to
Yeah,
generation in the verbal tradition, oral
verbal, yeah.
tradition. Yeah, and so there might be some secrets that Tad himself knows that it's gonna be revealed as this story progresses. And I just want to
Yeah,
give a shout out in Canada here yesterday, day before yesterday was Truth and Reconciliation Day for Native Aboriginal Canadians. So a shout out to my
that's cool.
Aboriginal Canadians
Yep.
and what have you. And so this was a good, timely, a good tale.
Yeah.
And it's not too often that we get a lot of Native American heroes. And I'm assuming Tad's going to be a hero, but maybe he's going to end up being a villain.
Yeah, and in that, that's a cool twist. I mean, let's see what happens. Let's see what to go. And in that, again, when you end up where how you kind of play that idea of how history books work and how they are being portrayed, even with what had for years, oh, Christopher Columbus, the greatest guy ever, and whatnot. And even if it wasn't just it, but the treatment and stuff even beyond Columbus was kind of, the history books didn't tell that. So what does happen when you switch that around? Another thing that I want to actually point out real quick that I thought was neat, and it actually is something for me and you to smile at, because me and you ended up doing Chainsaw Man when we did the manga deal, and I had told you that when you have it in, and I said when you have a flashback in manga, you have the black panels on the page, and it's something that I thought is a really neat idea to give people the idea of that. You actually have that in this in a weird little subtle way, because when they tell him to do the knot and they say, let's see if you can do the knot, you actually have two panels where we see that yellow kid there ended up trying to show him this and he really wasn't paying attention. And in those two panels, it's actually a black kind of purplish border
Oh,
around those two, especially when he's looking at the rope and then he remembers back to see, okay, they had it on the tablet, how to do this. I can't remember. And he's like saying, wrap it in, wrap it out. And he's trying to remember it. I thought it was kind of a neat little play that actually does seem to borrow from the manga deal of that. Because I actually at first was confused in that scene, because the guy ends up going, and you said he gets to bring something with him. I swear to God that he pulled out a tablet while this guy's like, they think witchcraft's going on there. He's like, wait a second, let me see my iPad. All right, I do this, do that. All right. Next thing you know, Columbus never finds America because he's obsessed with TikTok. He's doing TikTok dance
yeah.
videos or something. But I like the concept of this. And like I said, the idea of just grabbing him and doing it, it's interesting of what he's thinking. And in the art wise, you have kind of, everybody on the ship, they're gruff looking. They're not as detailed. When Columbus comes up, boy, it's almost like a god has walked on the ship. It gets very detailed. It's very bad. You see his clothes, all that. He seems larger than life. And I do think at that point, because we're really almost looking in the POV of, the steel, because if you end up having Tad, the idea of saying, oh my God, that guy's the worst, I hate Columbus, but he's still a huge historical figure. You would think that, they're kind of history buffs a little and how they've worked this out. It's one thing to yell about somebody and say you're going to do something, but when you're in the presence of them, there's something with, if we met Christopher Columbus right now, there's going to be something about him that's going to be impressive. It's, this is how he got to what he was then. So I think that it plays that out, like almost like the awe of, oh my God, this really's him. Even though he hates him, like, oh my God. And I thought that was well played. And then I started thinking the idea, like you said, like, what is the player? Does he become best friends with Columbus? Does he try, like I said, does he try to veer him in a different direction because he finds out, hey, I have to kill this guy, but he's kind of a nice guy. He's cool to hang out with. He's funny.
Yeah.
He could have something little. He seems like a real prick right away, but he's also, a captain of these ships. I just don't get this idea where at this point, he has already spoken English, which is a complete no-no. He seems to be connected with witchcraft. He is lying in a stowaway and can't do a knot. I don't know why they just don't throw him overboard. I don't know why they're going into this much of an effort to investigate this guy when they've got better and bigger things to be doing here
and
than worrying about a guy tying knots.
That's
you know
right,
what
because
I mean?
even though he blamed it on the kid, I
Yeah.
mean, he's the one that spoke
He's
English,
still
not the
part of
kid.
it.
I mean,
Yeah.
he's still screwed up. He's the one that couldn't tie a knot. It wasn't the kid's fault. He's still the one that spoke
Seriously.
English. And just to be clear, the reason why speaking English is a big deal is that he should be speaking either, I guess, I'm assuming Portuguese or Spanish
Portuguese or Spanish, yeah. And he
or
even
whatever.
says it's kind of a weird little dialect. They even say when he speaks it, oh, you're an inland guy. It's this little derelict. Because there's going to be those differences of little pronunciations and stuff. But yeah, he spoke English, and that's a traitor. That is somebody in there. So in that, I want to ask you, like, how much does he have to do? Because there's been like 5 things that have been messed up since they're all him. Like he has done, if you end up having strikes against you, he has at least 6. And in the roundabout deal, like whatever, take your pick.
Well,
Witch, traitor,
Yeah.
stowaway. I mean,
Well,
it just goes down the line.
Here's what I find fascinating about the butterfly effect.
Yeah.
If you follow that, it might be that kid that was killed, that he sacrificed,
Yeah.
maybe that kid, maybe the death of that kid is going
Yeah.
to have profound effects on history. We don't know who that
Any
kid
of this
is.
could.
Maybe that kid
Yeah.
grows up to be a famous or has some influence on the ship or saves
Exactly.
somebody or maybe saves Christopher Columbus or I don't know. Like you just don't know because he's already had a profound he's already killed somebody to get on the ship. How do we know
Yeah.
that history's not
How
already
about that? Yeah.
irrevocably changed?
Yeah,
So
and that's the crazy play of it. You're right. And it's funny because I usually get mad at stuff like that, but in this, it feels like when they're going back and doing they don't seem to be as like I said, they sent Tad because he speaks languages. That's it. He doesn't seem like he's an expert at any of this. So I think that they went with this idea, listen, things are going to get real sloppy. I mean, shit's going to go wrong, but it can't go that much more wrong of where we are now, but it can. And the idea of at the end, all you have to do is get rid of Columbus because we're really centered on that one thing, but he might have already messed up so many things already. I mean, even this at this point, you could play all sorts of things. This is where time travel and even this gets all wonky. The idea he's delaying them. Like they have like pretty much it seems like
and
they're at a standstill to go and invest. Like that could be it could just be a half a day.
and
That could really hit a storm.
that's
You
right.
could really fuck some things up.
Not only that, one thing I should mention, and this is another thing I Googled, when Columbus asks him what his name is at the end, he says his
Yeah.
name is Unctehi, and I
Mhm.
Googled that, and it means water monster or horned serpent.
Okay, yeah.
And apparently in Native American history, there's talk of, in the past of water monsters that the Native
Mhm.
Americans saw in the ocean and what have you. And so I'm wondering, was that part of his plan, or is that him
I'm
just
telling you,
on the fly? Does he have a devious plan?
I think
Does
he's
he actually?
trash talking.
Yeah, well,
That's
maybe, but I wonder, is he the one that started that whole
Yeah.
water monster, the Youngtae?
Yeah.
Maybe he's the one that started it. Maybe
There's
he's
some
creating his
interesting
own
things.
mythology.
Yeah, he
So,
might be. Yeah.
so
I think that's cool.
I don't know. Yeah, but it's in any event, it's funny how there's some similarities between this and Briar, the previous comic, insofar as there's a lot of questions that are interesting and posed, what have you.
Yeah,
I'm more satisfied with this comic in
I am
terms of
too.
giving us more payoff because we at least with this one we know exactly what his motive is. It's on the bloody title, Book One, Kill Columbus. So that's what I
Yeah.
like about it. But because it's time travel and because we've seen so many time travel stuff and movies and everything, we know that with the butterfly effect, you never know. The moment you start screwing, messing even with even the tiniest things,
Yeah.
you could have it could have a profound effect. And just when you think you're on the right path, you find yourself on a catastrophically different one. So
Yeah, and,
I'm curious to see.
again, the play of, you think that it can't go any worse. Well, it can, and that might be the play. Even that one, I like the idea, like, Columbus does seem very interested in Chad, too. I mean, at one point, it almost looks like he's gonna, like, shake his hand or something. He's a stowaway, but I thought that the play might be I don't know, the idea that he sees something different. I mean, when he ends up saying that Native American, like, there's nobody there would be able to know what he's saying. He's saying this as almost a trash talk of, in my mind, like, okay, these water monster things, like, you're not even gonna know that you're gonna start calling me something that's trash. But in that, you look at Columbus as like staring off into space, like, all right, whatever. I don't know that he just doesn't befriend Columbus, and Columbus might
Yeah,
just be like a
he
cool
might.
dude that he hangs with. And again, you could play that deal of, you hate to go with anything Hitler, so I'm not. I'll just go Columbus. Like yeah, I go back there and I want to take him down, but you don't know the person, and you might find out like, oh, he's kind of cool. I think I could sway him a different direction. I think that I could send him this way, and I think that that could go wrong as well because you don't really know this person. You don't know how bad their motivation is. Also, at the end, that kid isn't fully thrown off yet, but it looks
Okay.
like he's about to. So we'll have to see
May-
if maybe
Maybe he's alive.
they
Maybe he
save
doesn't.
him. Maybe they
Yeah.
end up like, no, 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 like, they're scaring him to whatever. And then I don't know. The idea of talking to goats made me laugh that he just ends up like, oh, what am I going to say? Okay, he's talking to goats down there. I want Columbus to say, like, because he does look like, I want him to say, we don't have any goats down there. And then all of a sudden there's trouble. But
Yeah.
yeah, I want to see how it plays out. It's interesting. I thought that, I guess it's weird. I'm worried. You're doing a lot of stuff with tying knots, and how long are we going to be on the ships heading to, America? Is this going to take us 4 issues? Because there's not a lot of things to do on a boat. But if it is that combo of him, getting close to Columbus and we have some fun little things, I can deal with that. But if we're just going to see the daily life of a stowaway rigger and the rest of the guy, I don't know that I need that, but we'll see. We'll see. I'm telling you, he's just sitting there. He's like, yay, we're going to this, new land there, whatever. Even though they get there by accident, they think whatever. But he's like, people are probably pretty cool there. Probably pretty neat people. We probably should be real nice to them, right? We shouldn't give them diseases and stuff. I mean, seriously, anybody here have like smallpox or anything? So jump off the ship now. I don't know. You have a lot of plays going on that I think are interesting. I want to see how it does play out. So, what would you give it?
I would give this. I'm giving this a 7.8 out of 10.
I'm going to give it a 7.5. So I'm just a little bit under, and it's a 7.5. In a way that I'm looking forward to the next issue, because I think with it developing more and opening up, I think this could actually be something really cool. I love the concept. I've never heard like that concept of let's go take out Christopher Columbus. Like I said, you have a lot of other big things like this of alt history and going back in time to stop somebody. But I do like an idea where a world that has gone completely bad, and in the way it could be bad because of global warming, or it could be bad because of bad leadership. It could be anything, but something's gone wrong that these people think that we just have to make sure that America doesn't end up the way it was. And in that, again, it doesn't feel like it's right from the headlines or anything like that. It just feels like a pretty cool deal, going back to almost like even the mysticism and stuff like that, and stuff in the folklores of Native Americans and stuff like that I like. But yeah, so I'm looking forward to going through that next issue and see how it is. And we actually, just a shout out, we did, and even being not, what am I saying? A disclaimer. We ended up getting a review copy of this to review, and I was glad that we did, because it might have been something that ended up going, past us under our radar that we wouldn't have realized. But I'm glad we did, and I did like it. Nothing to do with getting the thing, but I was glad that we did.
Yeah, I agree with you. IDW, shout out to them. I appreciated that. They actually watched some of our past reviews, and they were nice enough to ask us if we were interested. And so, and it's a real, like you said, you and I, we're not, if we don't like it, we'll say so. So it's always, sometimes it's like, I hope it's
well,
good.
that's the problem. Really, there is that issue. And the idea, even when I read it while I was reading it, I was thinking the idea of what do we do? This was the conversation in my head. What do we do if we really don't like it? Should we just not do it? And I thought, no. Well, this is what we're doing. We picked this book, just like the Briar. I wanted to like it more. I didn't love it, but there you go. And I did like this. I think that it has a lot of potential. It's one of those, I think that's the deal. It's potentially, it could be really, really good. I just hope that the pacing gets a little better and maybe get more character work in the present day characters, because they kind of got pushed aside a bit. But I'm more interested in Tad and Columbus anyway, right?
Yeah, and I do want to give a shout out to the cover, to the art. I thought the art was really good, and I thought that the cover art here, this cover A, is just gorgeous with the half his face. I wonder how symbolic this cover is, because it shows Tad on the cover. He's got, half his face is a skull under the ocean, and the ocean is the red and blue. It's the red, white, and blue of the American flag. It's actually brilliantly, beautifully done. The symbolism is just incredible. It looks amazing. I'm definitely going to be buying this cover. Because it's gorgeous, and it really just conveys so much of what the story could possibly be about, and it sort of hints maybe Tad's going to be a villain after all, because half of him is a skull. He kind of looks like a badass.
Yeah, he does. I mean, it's like a very much a horror comic that looks like it's like horror on the seven seas with pirates.
He could be the Unktahi, the water monster, because he kind of looks like a monstrous on the cover there. So,
and the funniest is, I would never have said this first issue was a horror comic, but I saw a couple of people talking about this, and they actually thought that that's how they described it, a horror comic. I'm like, I don't know. I thought it was just kind of an alt history time travel adventure, and it plays out pretty cool. So I'm glad that we did it. So thanks to everybody, IDW, and thanks, you're the one who suggested it. You're the one who got a hold of them. So that's cool. So all of that, again, I'll pull back and say I'll give Christopher Cantwell another issue of that. We'll go through the Briar. Maybe it's because I think that he'll mess it up and I could say, I told you so, but who knows? We'll see. I hope that it gets a little better for at least me in a selfish way. But no, I love that Junkyard Joe. I think everybody should check that out. And I think everybody should check out Earthdivers. And if you're a Christopher Cantwell fan, definitely get the deal with Briar. Or if you're one of the people who you said you love, you're more of a, fairy tale type thing, and you even like the Once Upon a Time, that sort of thing, and that's the feel you get. So if you did love those and you're already finished reading Fables, because really, if you're going to get that thing, go read Fables first, right? That's the be all end all. But yeah, there's some cool things. So again, glad we did these. I'm glad that we're continuing to do these. We'll see what pops up next week, but that is it. I end up where when we're doing this, I always try to see how long we've been recording, because I end up not paying attention when we start. What are we?
So it's
what are
an
we
hour
at?
and a half. We did 30 minutes.
Okay.
30 minutes each.
Oh, now
this
I
one.
see it. You just said it, and I see that now, because it was weird. All of the shows ended up being in this weird, like almost the same, like between like
Yeah.
an hour and 15 minutes, an hour and 22 minutes. I'm like, these things are weird. Like, what is there? An internal clock that goes up? I thought we went a lot further, more than this, but a little extra time. So thanks. But thanks everybody for listening. Thanks everybody who's listening or watching. Go into the show notes and check out all of the show notes, especially the stuff with Rocky. And if you're watching on his channel on YouTube, the Comic Boom channel, you already know that him and Jace have a kick-ass show, all of that stuff. But if you are listening on the podcast, or maybe even seeing this on my YouTube, go and check Rocky's stuff out. Definitely. But
check out Weirdscience DC comic book podcast. You guys review Marvel and manga, and you got a YouTube channel too. So can never get more brutally honest reviews than from Weirdscience. And I like to think occasionally, every now and then, I'm brutally honest too. So
yeah, I like that's see, that's the thing. I get fired up to inspire you to get fired up. I'm like, this is gonna get rocky. But yeah, I think that it's one of those things we're kind of going into this, and it's new, and we're kind of feeling around or whatnot. And I do want to be a little more positive on this podcast, but in a way that maybe find the books that we like to bring. I'm not going to pretend that I like something just because I want to be positive, but I think that there's so many, indie books that it is easy to find some things that we do love. And again, we gave a book a heck of a score in the 9.5, and have some things that we're looking forward to that we never really would have been down with. So I like it. So I'm glad we're doing it, just to repeat that again. But you take us out of here, Rocky.
All right. Thanks for watching and listening, everyone. And until next time, Comic Boom and Weirdscience out.
Out.